All right, what's up, y'all? Wes Mitchell here again. Chris Clark, of course, live on our Gamecock Central YouTube. Appreciate you joining us. If you've been on here before, you know the drill. I've got to go through real quick, and for one, it'll give everybody a chance to sort of get in line, and two, I've got to post our video links on our front page and on Twitter, just so everybody will know that we're live and rolling. So if you're already in line, I don't know how many people are already on here. If you're already in line, just hang tight. We'll spread this thing around, and then we'll get going. We already got a couple folks on here, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Obviously, the big news today being that Caleb McDowell, running back from Georgia, commits to South Carolina. And we're going to, of course, get to that. But while I'm letting everybody sort of get in line and get on the stream, maybe we'll talk a second about Will Muschamp. We may come back to it later on. But just real quick to sort of lead us off here, Chris, what maybe stood out to you about what Muschamp had to say yesterday? We're recording this on Tuesday afternoon. Monday, sort of late Monday morning, Will Muschamp spoke, I think, for almost 30 minutes on the teleconference. So hit a number of topics from current events to, everything his team is doing right now as far as sort of helping them get to stay educated about what they can do to sort of have their voices be heard, to having the team, almost the entire team as a whole, register to vote on Friday. And then he obviously talked about COVID-19 coming back to campus with that going on, and then some actual team stuff as well. So, Chris, what maybe caught your eye about what Muschamp had to say?
Well, I think, separating it into, it all has to do with the team, but sort of separating it into a couple different aspects. One, being more football related and the other being more, social related with everything going on. I thought that Muschamp's actions, I guess you could call them, with the team and what he's done and what he said has been, impressive from that standpoint. He's been decisive and forceful, and there's no forceful in the sense of that he's taken a stand. It's been obvious and evident what that stand is, and he's been supportive of his players throughout. I don't think there's been any mixed messages or what is he going to do or what does he think. There's been none of that because he's made it clear from the outset. And I think just, scheduling that he mentioned, they had a 2.5 hour Zoom meeting. He had some speakers, who are very relevant and very knowledgeable on some of the things that are going on, and gave his players a forum to be able to speak and tell how they feel. And then the other stuff, the voting, the march on Friday that, he spoke about. And I think he's right that actions do speak louder than words. And to see the team go and do some of that and him be at the forefront of it, I think it gave a very supportive message, to the players. From a team standpoint, I don't know that there was anything incredibly new other than a couple injury updates and just sort of how they're handling everything. With Rosendo Lewis and Chad Terrell being limited, or out until probably the beginning of September, he said. But just some general thoughts on, how they're handling everything, the protocols they're putting into place. I think those would be my main takeaways from what he said during his conference.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. We've we've seen some schools. We've seen news leak out from some schools about the return. About some COVID positives. South Carolina obviously testing everybody and keeping everyone informed in house about all that, but going to keep those test results private for now and not going to release those. I think, for me, when it first came out that Oklahoma State had some positives, Alabama had some positives, really, I don't think that's a surprise, as we've learned how prevalent the virus is. Anytime you have 100 people, be it football players or just 100 random people, if you tested them all, chances are, I think just the percentages show us that you're going to probably have some positives in the mix. So I think just important though that they do have all these protocols in place that they are following them. And I thought it was interesting, Chris, the actual workout protocol where the guys are entering in one side of the building. There's 4 separate groups that are working out together. And then you have, I guess they have to change clothes while they're there at the facility. And then there's check-ins where you're checking temperature, symptoms check. And then, hey, you guys, 20, 25 of you, whatever that worked out, y'all leave. Then we have to deep clean everything and get ready for the next group. So it's really a pretty amazing undertaking that's going on at schools across the country just to even make all this possible.
It is. There's a lot that they're doing, and I think you've made the point in the past that it was a good point that these guys are going to be safe is a relative term, but they're going to be taken care of as far as what you can do within football about as well as you can. Obviously when you're I've had a lot of people tell me it's a great point that you can't social distance in football. I mean, if you're working out, there are certain things you can do, to try to limit what you're doing as far as getting close to people. When you actually get in the game, there's no distancing. I mean, you're all up on people, there's piles, there's all this stuff. And so it's all about doing what you can in the interim until you get to that point. And certainly workouts with conditioning, lifting, those things are integral to having success in football and really preventing injuries, being in tip top shape so you can perform well. And so those things are very important. And you're going to probably, like you said, a combination of things. You got a lot of people in one place, even though you're staggering them. You got just a big population of people, 100-something people plus staffers. So yeah, you're probably going to get some, but just limiting it and doing what you can, so putting all these protocols into place, is probably going to minimize, the effects that you have. And the other thing, obviously is with the clusters, if somebody does test positive, you remove, that player from the equation for a couple of weeks, you test everybody in that cluster, remove them, and just to try to limit any potential spread if you do have some guys that are positive.
Yeah, and you basically instantly have to sideline everybody in your cluster,
Yep.
And quarantine them at least until you have a negative test. I believe it's an automatic 14-day quarantine. I don't quite know if you get quarantined, you're in the cluster, and then you test negative. Does that put you back in action?
That's the part that was unclear to me, because they said that they would test and then remove also. So I don't know if the impression I got, and I'm not saying this is accurate, just my takeaway in sort of hearing and then reading again was that you remove them anyway and quarantine them. I don't know if you get released after a certain number of days, if maybe they test you more than once, because we've heard some instances, Wes, during all this stuff about, maybe a person tests negative and then positive later, a few days later or whatever it may be. So I don't know if they're just trying to avoid that or what it is. But the impression I got is you remove everybody in the cluster. Now, is that actually accurate? I'm not entirely sure. We might have to try to get some clarification on that, in terms of how they're handling it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so obviously we're live on YouTube. If you're watching us on there and you have not subscribed, help us get our subscription numbers up on there. Obviously, it's free, and I keep saying we're going to have daily content. I think for the most part, the last few weeks, other than the weekends, we have had something new on the YouTube pretty much every day for you. So subscribe on there. It is free. And Chris, we told them if we got to 3,000 that we'd give something away. So with that being said, if you have questions or if you just want to be entered in, anybody that asks a question today on the YouTube, or just if you're listening right now, just put a comment, put anything in there. And if you make a comment today or ask a question on our YouTube page, we will. What do you think, Chris? 6 free months?
Oh, I think that sounds awesome. I think that will be it'll take people through the football season since we're going to have one.
Yeah.
recruiting. I mean, all sorts of stuff. So I think that's an awesome deal for a lucky person.
Yeah, but you got to comment. I see there's just a handful of people on here right now. So comment, post a question, whichever, and we'll pick somebody at the end, and we'll tell you how to get in touch with us, or you'll have to. I don't think it's not like on our board where I can just click anybody and see their information, see their email. So um, if you're wanting to be entered, you're probably going to have to contact us either on Twitter or just email me, Wes at GamecockCentral.com if you win. But let's move right on to the main reason we went ahead and had this chat today, and that's going to be the commitment of Caleb Juju McDowell from the same area and same high school originally of Jamie Robinson, of course, the South Carolina Rising sophomore defensive back. And our first question from TS, what does McDowell bring to the team? Actually, directly sort of leads us into what we're going to talk about anyway. So, Chris, I think with McDowell, it's sort of been trending this way for a couple of weeks now. When before he even decommitted from NC State, we had heard, some word that there was a chance this was going to happen. I think he wanted to keep it very, very quietly, keep it from getting out at that time. We saw actually about a week ago, he decommitted from NC State and then didn't wait long to go ahead and go public with a commitment to South Carolina. And, I think ever since they offered, this was an offer like the middle of last month. Des Kitchings evaluated, really liked him, and extends the offer. And I think ever since that offer, I think that sort of just changed his thought process about where he wanted to go. And I know some people I noticed thought, well, this is an NC State guy, there must be a prior relationship. But actually, from everything I've gathered, there was, NC State started recruiting him after Des Kitchings was already gone. So it just is basically it's a random coincidence that he's at NC State, Des Kitchings' former school. There was no prior relationship there, just a new relationship here. Mike Bobo has recruited that area for South Carolina. And, just a situation where I think South Carolina was just had a lot of the things he was looking for. And he wants to be an SEC guy. I was obviously reading what Chad Simmons had when he talked to Juju today, and he's always wanted to play in the SEC. And I think that played a big part in it.
Yeah, and I think that those relationships, Mike Bobo, one thing that we knew when he got to South Carolina, from a recruiting standpoint, is that he was going to have a lot of connections in Georgia and in that sort of South Georgia area. And certainly Lee County is a program he's very familiar with. South Carolina fans should be familiar with in producing Jamie Robinson, who's done quite well in his short time at South Carolina. And so, a guy that the staff knew about. This is something that you see a good amount when you have a staff changeover. Obviously, the board's going to shift. Some of the new coaches are going to bring in some guys that they know about, take a second look at, or maybe it's a guy that's already on this staff's board that they're able to get in on. And so I think there was an element of that to this. McDowell picked up more offers this spring, South Carolina being one of those. NC State, West, I don't think even offered. They offered fairly recently too here, didn't they? I think, it was not a commitment that lasted a really long time. And I think we're going to see a lot of that too. We're going to see a lot of guys looking around, but McDowell seems really solid to the Gamecocks. Like you said, wanted to be in the SEC, is comfortable with the plan as far as how it'll be used in the offense. This is a guy that I think can do a lot of things within South Carolina's offense, as well as on special teams. I think he's going to be an asset in multiple ways on this team.
Yeah, and I think not necessarily that just every down grinder type back that's going to be out there basically carrying the football 25 times a game. But I do think you look and you see a guy that is very, actually for his size, he's listed like 5'10", 175. He's very well put together. Workout monster. I've seen these times. I know, Chris, you talked to, and I'm going to throw his film on here in a second. You talked to his head coach this afternoon. Did he mention some of those workout numbers to you as well? I know
Yeah.
seen prior interviews where he's listed as having like a 350-pound bench press and like a 600-pound squat at what, 5'10", 175.
His coach mentioned that parallel squat number, and there's a video. We'll have a piece probably tonight. We're recording, we're live right now at 2:15 on a Tuesday, and so either late this afternoon or tonight, we'll have our coaches corner up with Dean Fabrizio, who's the Lee County, Georgia head coach for our subscribers on Gamecock Central, and Coach Jamie Robinson. He's coached a lot of players who've gone on to the college level and has had a lot of success at Lee County. I think they won 2 state titles in the last 3 years. So lots of good players. And just raved about McDowell. And he brought up that 600-pound squat number. There's actually a video that we found of that'll be in that piece. So pretty impressive. I mean, for a guy that size, especially to have sort of that power. And one thing that Fabrizio pointed out was, McDowell's straight line fast. He's a guy who's probably 4.4 range, 10, 800 meters. He's been timed in those numbers, but he's also got that sort of short area, short range quickness. So he can start and stop. He's got acceleration, but he's also got straight line speed. And so he can make guys miss. And then when he gets in the open field, he's got the ability to, hit a home run for you in the screen game, in the run game, and then on special teams as well. So he's got some power in the lower body, like you said, put well together, and then the speed too.
Yeah, and the guy that I have been told he compares to that's been brought up to me would be Nyheim Hines. Now, Nyheim Hines was a very highly rated guy out of high school, star kid, and obviously ended up in NC State. Was used all over for them as far as a guy who could was primarily a running back, but could help split out at slot, can help in kickoff return. And I think you have a pretty versatile kid here in that a lot of what they did with him this past season was they needed him on defense. And I think they had some veteran guys on offense already. So used him on defense, used him on special teams. I think that plus the fact, I think you're always looking why is a guy maybe a little more under recruited than you expect. And there, a lot of times you can find some reasons. And I think with him, it's just that he did play a lot of defense. And then there were no camps, obviously. So he falls in that category that we've talked about, of being someone that you just maybe didn't quite get the attention that they would have otherwise. And now we're going to turn to huddle here, Chris, and just take a little look at really what the guy was capable of this year. And I think explosiveness, he's kind of a one-cut guy for the most part. But, Chris, I think you look and from a big picture standpoint, here you'll see him in the return game as well. This has been a priority, and we've talked about it on this show. We've written about it probably countless times at this point. Having some explosiveness, playmaking ability, guys that can take it to the house at any given time has been a huge priority for the staff for this class. And I think you're seeing that, here. Obviously, you get sort of an every down back in Marshawn Lloyd in this past class, and we expect him to be the starter this fall. And he's going to play a lot, and he's going to have a big career, I think, at South Carolina. But I think this guy is sort of maybe even what you would call a complementary back if you sort of compare the skill sets.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, not a guy that you look at and say, hey, this is a 3-down running back like a Marshawn Lloyd or, Marcus Lattimore, Mike Davis type, to use a couple former Carolina backs. But you're exactly right. South Carolina has really prioritized in this class, adding some guys that, maybe they don't have the quote unquote ideal body type, but some guys that can go make plays for you. You look at Sam Reynolds out of Alabama. He's a smaller guy who maybe doesn't fit into is he just a special teams guy mainly? Is he a scat back? Is he a slot receiver? And the answer is really South Carolina says maybe he's some of all of those things. And, McDowell is a little bit more of a traditional running back, but you can also put him in the slot. You can let him return kicks. You can let him return punts, that Nyheim Hines type thing. And Mike Bobo's had a lot of success in the past in the screen game. And that's something where I think you get excited about McDowell's potential as well. He's got, as you can see here, he's got a lot of just straight line speed, but we also see on this film that he makes a lot of guys miss, and he plays a little bit bigger than his size with that listed 5'10", 175. He doesn't look, huge in the lower body, but he does show the ability to break some tackles sort of in those phone booth type of areas, and then he can get out of space and make people pay. So, I think we've seen some guys in the past that have had a lot of success, whether it's a guy like Hines or, well, he doesn't remind me of an Ace Sanders, but it just shows you where, you can get a guy that maybe doesn't have those, like I said, quote unquote, ideal measurables. If he can go get the football and make plays for you, and he does things like this at a high level in Georgia high school ball, then he's going to have a chance to do that at South Carolina.
Yeah, I want to throw another word out there, Chris, that was mentioned to me about him, and that's just the word toughness. A lot of these South Georgia kids, it seems like, are tough-nosed ball players, and if everybody that was watching this film right here, a couple of those plays where he's on defense, he may not be a big guy, but he hammered kids.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a big thing as well. If you're going to make the jump from the SEC, especially as that sort of quote unquote undersized guy, you better have some toughness to you. And he's certainly, from what I've been told, and then just what I see with my own eyes, he does. Here you see that. I mean, that's a play that you just saw that not every running back makes. So I think there is some ability in the pass game. The hands are there. I think the ball skills are there. He's not just a track guy playing football. I think you look at the toughness, the love of the game is something that's been mentioned to me. And, you just add all those things together. I think ranking wise for me, Rivals has him as like a mid 3-star guy. Just watching the film and what I've been told, I think a mid to high 3 at this point in his career, Chris, it is probably fair. I mean, I think I think we get on here and we point out the positives about kids, and sometimes people think that you just hype up everybody. I think we try to be. I mean, anybody that's going to play SEC football is a really good high school football player. Like that's a given. But I think as far as a ranking, just me looking at him, I think, he's 5'6", 3-star right now. I think a 5'7", 3-star. I would still put him maybe short of 4-star, but I think he's a guy you would really love to see in camp. You'd love to, put him on a laser and see what his actual 40 time is right now. And you'd love to see what he can do as a senior this coming season.
Yeah. And I think, again, you're given that he's maybe going to be a guy that you get the ball in college in some unique ways. He goes and he makes a special teams impact for you as a returner. Maybe he can break one for you every now and then. That's a huge advantage to your team. He's a guy that you can use in sort of that scat back or that, third down back or, type of role. Those guys may not get some of the acclaim of a 5-star like Marshawn Lloyd, who can be on the field pretty much every play. But nonetheless, it's really important. And so he's going to get thought of right now as sort of undersized in the traditional sense for a running back. But this could end up being a guy West, despite what his ranking is now and what it will end up being. We can't really predict that, but I think we're on the same page as far as potential ranking and what it is right now, what it could be. I think he's a guy that still has a chance to make a significant impact. The other thing, I mean, 3-star is a good ranking too. 3-star guy is someone that you're looking at and says this guy has potential to go play pro football. And if you can do that, then you're pretty good. You're in a very small percentile, of guys that can end up going and doing that.
Yeah, and Chris, I'm watching this tape, man. The kid can turn and run and flip his hips at DB as well. And like I said, you're about to see him return a punt here, but I mean, now don't get me wrong, he's being recruited firmly as a running back at South Carolina. But if for whatever reason that didn't work out, I'm not so sure he wouldn't have a chance to possibly help out at defensive back as well, just depending on how things fall. So
well, I mean, and if you want to miss on a guy, which I'm obviously not saying that's the case here, but if you are projecting guys, it's a good idea to miss with athleticism, So if a guy can play multiple positions, if he's, a multi-sport guy, for instance, if he shows that he can play DB and receiver and running back in return for you, I mean, that makes him more valuable, but it also gives him a chance to do a lot of different things for your team. And so even if one position doesn't work out, maybe another one does. And so that's why when you take a guy like Caleb McDowell who can do a lot of different things, and he's got the numbers and from a testing standpoint and the production on the field where he's done it at different spots, that's a big value to college coaches, and it increases his ability to go on and be successful at a position or a certain role.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's run through these questions real quick. Then I want to hit a couple of other things that we have planned. David says, "How do you guys feel about us beating LSU and Clemson? I think we can win both games." I'll leave that one to you, Chris.
Oh, thank you so much. It's like a hot potato. Right now, I don't think you favor South Carolina in either of those games, especially, they're both on the road, right? And we don't know when either game will be, but right now, going into, say, a night game at Death Valley and LSU, or going up to Clemson at night, those are going to be two very tough places to play. And, oh, by the way, they're going to be two really good teams. Clemson, offensively especially, I think is where you have the most concern when you're any team matching up against them, with Trevor Lawrence and the weapons that they have. Travis Etienne somehow back for his senior year, against all odds. And then even if Justin Ross is out, hopefully he can return to football at some point. I don't know if everybody's read about the injury. He had the surgery for a congenital spine issue. Hopefully he can resume his career at some point. But regardless of whether or not he's in the fold during this season, they're going to have some weapons, and they got a lot of talent. They've recruited very well. So I don't think that's one, especially on the road, that you can look at and say, I favor South Carolina. Is it a win? Is it a game they could win? I mean, on some level, yeah, but I don't think you put very high odds on it right now here in early June. And LSU, look, they lost, I don't know, 37 guys to the draft. What was it, Wes? I mean, they had so many.
There's a lot.
Whether it was some senior guys or some early, they had a lot of early defections too after they won the national title last year. Some guys that were high NFL draft picks and left early. They're losing a ton, but they've also recruited well on that roster. And so, you like Derek Stingley, and they're getting one of those awesome receivers back, and they've got some backs who are really good. They've got linemen. They've got athletes all over the place. And then you tack on, hey, you're playing at LSU. I mean, it's a tough place to play. So those aren't two games I'd favor South Carolina in. If you're sort of, how sometimes we break it down into categories of should wins and toss-ups and, uphill battles to win type games, I'd put those two in that last category right now, just because of what those other teams are going to return and how good they're going to be.
Yeah, firmly in the uphill battle category. Let's see. Kyle Foster says, "Do we have the same luck with flipping Thomas Davis?" He's an interesting one, Chris. I know South Carolina is high on him. I know if you just follow the Twitter stuff, he often tweets, about the Gamecocks and puts out his graphics and stuff like that, sort of seem positive for South Carolina. But, man, I think I was a little bit maybe surprised to see that he told the Miami site on Rivals that he has Miami as his leader, and Miami actually just recently offered him. And, if it's going to be one of those things like a lot of these guys where it's going to depend on the visits and the timing, meaning if he goes ahead and commits, I think Miami is just maybe one of those sort of dream school type scenarios for him. Anytime you have one of those, sometimes a guy just sort of goes with his heart and commits. And this could be the case. Now, if he takes some visits, sees some schools, I certainly think South Carolina, one of the schools that would get a visit from him. And then if that happens, I think Carolina would have a shot.
Yeah, it's been pretty evident that, and he just, backed away from that commitment to Mississippi State that was sort of, I think it was short-lived also, but that wasn't surprising just because, whether he carried that commitment through and continued looking at other schools or he decided to back off. I think we all knew just based on what he was saying and the social media activity that he was still looking around. I mean, Indiana offered, Miami offered, South Carolina offered. So he was continuing to look at schools. I did think those comments were interesting too, Wes, but it seemed like Miami and South Carolina have both been schools that have really sort of captured his attention. And so it'll be interesting to see where it goes, but I'm in the same camp as you. I think it's all about, for the Gamecocks, whether it's Davis or a bunch of other guys that are in the same category, just get to the season, get them on campus, you got to go out and win some games this year, and then you'll be able to get some traction. But I think Davis is someone they'll be able to be in the game with, going forward.
Yeah, let's continue to hit some questions. Dexter says he needs to put on weight before he sees serious playing time. And so the only reason we got this guy is because we were his only SEC offer. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, anytime you can step in and be a big enough offer that it just changes a guy's mind, that's not always a bad thing. And I think we've said it time and time again. There are guys out there right now that are really good football players that just have not been able to get the exposure that they otherwise would have gotten. So to me, evaluation is always more art than science. It can sometimes be a bit of a crapshoot, especially early on. Here's the thing: people get caught up in rankings early on in the process, and then what we find out is those rankings adjust and change and move as the process goes on. Well, right now, in a normal case, you're able to continue to gather information by seeing kids at camp. Both your sort of your spring camps that are being put on by Rivals and Nike and all these other people. Then you can maybe check them out in the spring and see them at their spring, high school practices, see how they've maybe improved. Then you see them at the summer camps like Chris and I get to go to, watching South Carolina's camps. None of that is taking place right now. So I think if you think rankings are sort of a crapshoot in general, in that they sort of can change as they go, and to me, your 5-star guys and your upper 4-star guys, they're kind of no-brainers. Like, you can just look and see, okay, that guy's different. That guy's built different. The real evaluation takes place in finding the guys that are maybe a little bit more under the radar, and either having better information in that you find out about them before somebody else, or you have just a better literal evaluation process. Right now, a lot of that's being taken away. So to me, Chris, going to be very interesting to see 3-4 years down the road how the rankings for this class in general sort of compares as far as accuracy to how a guy turns out compared to your average year. And that maybe extends to 2022 as well, because something people forget, a lot of the offers that go out during spring practice and during summer camp are for your rising juniors, not even necessarily your rising seniors. So that's going to affect that class a great deal as well.
Yeah. So a couple points. I'll go with what you said first. I agree with you. And, the thing about a lot of people bag on camps for, I don't really know why, but, say, well, this kid, they're not going to move him up unless they see him in camp, whatever. But, college coaches use camps as an evaluation tool all the time. I mean, a big one. A lot of college coaches say it. So, I mean, when you're looking at rankings, if you get to see a kid, camp shouldn't be everything, right? But if you get to see a kid in camp, that can help you a lot, because sometimes the film can lie, or sometimes you got incomplete information. And so whether or not you come away with an accurate picture of a kid, whether or not you end up being right about his ranking because of what you've seen in camp as, an analyst or someone who does rankings, I mean, it's not the end all be all, and you're not necessarily going to rank the kid accurately in terms of what he turns out to be. And there's a lot of things that go into that, but it does help. I mean, if I'm ranking a guy, which we don't rank kids on the Rivals network, that's not something Wes and I do. But if we did, we would both want to see as many kids as possible in camp, because there's so many different things you can look at. So it is going to be interesting. And Secondly, I mean, look, if you took a roster at South Carolina or any other SEC school, if you took a roster full of kids who didn't have an SEC offer and a bunch of other high level schools didn't want them, you're probably not going to win a lot of games, right? But there are room for guys like that. I mean, I mentioned Ace Sanders earlier. I don't think, not really the same player as McDowell. Sanders was a receiver and return man, but Ace Sanders was 165 pounds in high school. He played at 175 and he was 5'8". And he made a lot of plays for South Carolina. And then he went and played in the NFL. He also didn't have an SEC offer out of high school. Now he was ranked as a low 4-star, but he didn't have, to my knowledge, an SEC offer. He had, South Florida and Rutgers and, Iowa State, West Virginia, schools like that. So it is possible to go in and sneak underneath and get a guy who can really play. Eric Norwood wasn't a big SEC guy. Now, your strategy in recruiting shouldn't be, well, we're just going to be so much smarter than everybody. We're going to get guys who don't have any SEC offers, and we're going to take 25 of those and take our chances. Again, probably not going to win, but you can have that balance. And it's happened every single school out there who has won championships, which ultimately that should be any program's goal. You're going to be they've got a mix of, normally they have an elite quarterback. They got a lot of really good playmakers. They're really good on both lines of scrimmages. That's really what your formula is. And also what you typically see is a mix of super high level prospects, including a bunch of 4 and 5 stars who were wanted by everybody, but also some kids that maybe weren't as big. Josh Jacobs for Alabama. I think he had a Missouri offer. Oklahoma didn't take him. He was awesome for Alabama. He was also mixed in with a bunch of other high level prospects. So I think that's what you got to be concerned about. If you look, you got to say, what's the whole class look like? And then if you take a guy, is he a good player? And is he going to be able to thrive in the role that they've set out for him? And I think there's room for guys like Caleb McDowell, if you're signing good classes around him.
Yeah, and again, matches what they're looking for as far as speed, playmaking ability, and continuing to add that to the roster. All right, let's roll right on through. David says, do you feel like we can land Darion Ingram Dawkins? Of course, the Gaffney defensive tackle. Another guy that I think if you start looking the offer list for him, you would think maybe is a bit underrated as a mid 3-star guy as well. It's the competition has gotten increasingly difficult here. I think Alabama adding an offer yesterday, that's always been an offer that I think was going to matter to him if it came in. So I think this is one where Chris, I've always thought if you sort of take out the up and down nature of recruiting, especially, we all know Darion, if you follow him on Twitter, he enjoys recruiting. He enjoys the recruiting process. I think he enjoys the fact that the big name national powers are now talking to him and coming after him. Mm-hmm. An Alabama offer still resonates a ton, and it's going to resonate with Darion Ingram Dawkins. But I've always thought if you throw out the up and down nature of everything, that he ultimately was going to end up at South Carolina, that in-state with the Gamecocks, the school that's prioritized him the longest and the most, is going to win out. Now, does that actually happen? Recruiting surprises us all the time. If you follow the actual information, I don't know if there's a lot of information right now about exactly where he's leaning. Georgia has been a school to watch the entire time. Tennessee has been a school to watch probably the last couple of months. But I still ultimately think the chances are it's South Carolina, but the number of schools that continue to pop up that are real possibilities to get him, that number also continues to grow.
Yeah. And, man, I don't, Darion, as we've documented, had an announcement scheduled, at one point that he didn't end up going through with. And even if he had, we would still, in my opinion, be sitting here talking about his recruitment, right? If he had let's say he had committed to South Carolina the question may have been, can South Carolina hang on to him? If he committed to Tennessee or Georgia at the time, the question would be, can South Carolina flip him? That's not one that's going to be over because, as you said, Wes, he's someone that has continued to communicate with coaches, and that's the expectation. Probably still some room to pick up. There wasn't much room for him to pick up other offers because he's got a whole bunch of them, but he did get the Alabama one. I expect that they'll have a say in some form or fashion. Whether there'll be a long-term player, we don't know, but I'm sure he'll communicate with Alabama because they're Alabama. And there's probably going to be more visits on the dock whenever those do get opened back up. So I think it's a long game here. No matter, he didn't obviously go through with the verbal commitment, but if he did, it wouldn't have changed much, in my opinion, in terms of the way we're covering it.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, let's roll on through. Rutledge, this is actually a topic we were going to hit anyway. Let's see. What do you guys feel about Omega Blake? Are we a factor for him? Do you think he's a guy who can help out? I'm going to turn on the film here in a second, but I'll answer the first part first. I think South Carolina is in great shape here, Chris. I've already put in a future cast prediction actually for the Gamecocks. We had, for those of you who are not subscribers, we also always have our Carolina Confidentials and our insider reports where we post what we're hearing sort of around the program and around college football recruiting. And, I said late last night, early this morning, that Omega Blake is someone that I would say is a South Carolina lean. I think that was the offer he's been wanting. I think at times he was wishing that offer would come a little bit quicker. It was the vibe I was getting, but I think this offer was really, really big for him. The only other thing to watch here is going to be, does one of these schools we've been talking about, a Clemson? I understand that Clemson reached out very recently within the last week or so, and that he talked to Dabo Swinney, that some other schools like Georgia, Alabama are at least talking to him. Now, as things stand right now, I think that with the offer in hand and the chance, it's a committable offer, the chance to jump in, I personally don't see him waiting very long at all. I think the next couple of weeks, you could maybe see him go ahead and accept this offer. Sometimes with in-state guys, when you get the offer you've been waiting on, you don't want to push it back anymore. Why risk anything? Why risk a school just filling up if that's the school you've always wanted to go to?
Yeah, and I think a question, I think you covered all that perfectly, so not much to add from that standpoint. But I think one thing that people may look at is, well, why offer now? Is South Carolina, are they missing on some guys, or why would this change? But I think a few things. Number one, sometimes you do take your time a little bit more with an in-state guy, and some of the reasons that you relayed there relate to that. But also, academics is something that Omega has done really well in that category lately, and it's something South Carolina's wanted to watch. And they've just continued to scout him. They saw him in camp last summer. Obviously, he did a lot of different things for South Point. He's played quarterback in his career. He's played receiver. He's played defensive back. The staff scouted him at a basketball tournament. When was that? January, I think, January or early February. They scouted him at a basketball tournament just to sort of get a feel for the athleticism there. And he's someone that can do a lot of things for you. And so probably a receiver on their board, but certainly he's capable, very capable of playing defensive back. Former Gamecock Devontae Holloman is head coach there at South Point. But yeah, I agree with you. I think he's someone that South Carolina is going to have a really, really good shot with going forward.
All right, again, guys, we're here on Gamecock Central YouTube. If you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button. We did hit 3,000 here recently, and I promise we're going to give something away. So if you were not on here earlier and you didn't hear me, anybody who asks a question or makes a comment is going to be entered into the drawing for 6 free months to Gamecock Central at the end of this. So we'll probably talk another 10 minutes, so stick around. But if you haven't made a comment or a question yet, make sure you get on that. We've had several questions, but you can put the letter T on there if you want. Just make a comment, do anything, and you'll be entered in to get a free subscription to Gamecock Central. We're going to pick one person, but if I can get it pulled up now, I am going to get Omega Blake's film. By the way, again, want to thank Huddle. We get all of our video from there. I got to say, man, if anybody out there that uses dips, if you watch Huddle,
You're gonna think twice.
yeah,
Yeah.
those of you who watch Huddle a lot know what I'm talking about. But
Yep.
man, every single how much is being paid in advertising to Huddle?
Yeah.
To basically be Huddle's primary primary sponsor.
Yeah. It's crazy, man.
So anyway, all right, I think I got Omegas here ready to go. But dude's a playmaker, man. I think that's the thing that stands out to me. He's got some size, he's got some length. I asked around, Chris, and you're gonna see here, he played some quarterback, he played wide receiver, which is where he's at right here. Played defensive back, helps on special teams. I get when you look at 6'2", 6'3", especially these SEC coaches like Will Muschamp, the guys at Kentucky really seem to prioritize length in their defensive backs. And you look at what they've done there. They've offered him as a defensive back. I get it. But also, man, I think the guy makes plays with the ball. And I think you're very, very tempted if it's me to play him on offense. Asking around, I think the South Carolina offer is sort of at receiver, but also with that caveat of, hey, Will Muschamp likes you at DB. If it doesn't work out at receiver, there's always a chance to go play some DB.
Yeah, and I go back to another actually former South Point athlete, Darion Kendrick, who was one of the best in the country when he came out in the 2018 class. And, he played quarterback and defensive back at less receiver than from what I remember than Omega Blake plays. But he was someone that began his career at Clemson as a receiver. And then he just transitioned over to defensive back. He had some guys ahead of him. There was a need there at defensive back. So he transitioned. He's doing quite well for himself in that category, has NFL potential. So I think Blake, while I wouldn't rank him as highly as DK, he's a good prospect in his own right. And I think he is good with the ball in his hands. You see here, he can break some tackles, show some elusiveness in the open field. He's not an elite athlete in my view, but I think he's really competitive. He has that length. He has some ability to, get vertical, win some balls in the air, win some 50-50 balls, and has a lot of upside. And then defensive back too. I've always liked him as a defensive back prospect because of that length, that you mentioned. And you mentioned Kentucky offering him. I think he could play in the SEC as a defensive back, whether it's safety or corner. There's a good bit to like there. So, a lot to like about Omega as just an athlete in general, but I am intrigued by him just like you with the ball in his hands.
Did DK end up being a 5-star?
Yes, he was. Mm-hmm.
DK was, shoot, man. As many great athletes as have come out of South Point in their actually relatively short history, to me, DK is right up there, just athletically, as one of the best athletes they had ever had. So, it's not really a shot at Omega to say he's not quite.
Right. Not at all. There's been a ton of them, man. And I'll tell you, side note, a lot of people at South Point are raving about a 2023 kid named DJ Barksdale, who I've heard is potentially the next DK level recruit. And now, obviously, there's a good bit of progression between now and then, but he's apparently got a chance to be really good. And seems like they've had a lot of guys that have come out, man, where you could just say this guy's an athlete. DK was one of them. Omega's one of them, where you can play him at multiple positions. And certainly it's just like when I mentioned Ace Sanders with Caleb McDowell earlier and saying that, maybe you're not as high on him as Ace Sanders and obviously they play a different position. Not a slide on the guy we're talking about at all. It's just sort of hard when you get a player who's done great things in high school for his entire career and then has gone on to college and doing things at a high level. It's sort of a high bar to clear sometime. But again, I've always liked Omega as a prospect and believe that he's got a good bit of potential if he continues progressing.
Yeah, I mean, watch this, man. He kind of just makes it look easy. Um, I think he, for the most part, is the best player on the field in a lot of these. It appears, and just has that natural ability to go make plays. And I think if it ends up falling that way, falling to South Carolina, that he will, be a good get for them. And I actually think, talking to some folks I trust in Rock Hill, man, he's maybe one of the guys in the state that has the chance to move up the most, going into his senior year as far as the rankings go. He's still only a mid 3-star guy. Could see him maybe getting a little bit more notoriety and being a borderline 4-star kid. And I think there's several guys in the state that could potentially move up, certainly with big senior years. But I think we've talked about it, man. South Carolina needs some playmakers at the receiver position. There you see the ball skills again, and this kid just seems to have it. And I think we were wondering if the offer would eventually get out to him. We knew it was possible, and runs under the ball very, very well. There was no slowdown in his stride at all on this play we just saw, and just really a lot to like about him if South Carolina can get him locked up.
Yeah, definitely. Again, a guy that maybe doesn't, he's got a defined position, but he's a guy that is versatile enough to where he can do different things for you. And I'm going to see him make a impact here on special teams. So, I think he's a guy that, in my opinion, start out as receiver, see how that goes, but he could certainly play defensive back with that length and the skill set and that competitiveness. South Carolina I think they've gotten a good handle on athletically what he can do, and just became comfortable with putting him as a guy that, is on the offer board. When you do that with him in particular, you're going to have a shot to go and potentially get him. But a good bit to like about him as a prospect and as a guy with the ball in his hands to start with.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of a good comparison for him, but he reminds me of someone, but I can't quite just place it. So I don't know. I'm going to keep thinking about that. I get the DK comparisons, and people in Rock Hill tell us that he's in the same conversation, with DK as far as what he's done for that high school. But, just to get a really good comparison, I can't really place who I think he looks like, but hopefully I can think of that later on. All right, we got one more question, then we're going to do our little giveaway. Stash 17. What does Will Muschamp need to do to keep his job, and is the university stuck with him financially since they lost money due to COVID-19? Well, I think it's an interesting question, and obviously COVID-19 is going to affect all financial decisions moving forward. And I think if you're South Carolina, any big decision you make, you have to factor that in. Now, part of this answer is that we just don't know, because I think you look, man, and they still don't know. Are we talking about 100% capacity? Are we talking about 50% capacity? Are we talking about, even if you make it allowed to be 100% capacity, are people going to still go? Are people going to make that decision, even if you say, hey, it's on the fans to make their own personal decisions about their own health? Are people going to pack a stadium with 80,000 people right now? I don't know. I mean, I know we've opened everything up, Chris, but I'm looking at the percent positive of cases, and I know we knew it was going to go up with more testing, but the percent positive in the state of South Carolina of COVID positives is going up as well. It appears that the trend is. So, do we necessarily completely have this virus under control yet? Maybe not. So I think there are going to be considerations about financial stuff, both from a protocol standpoint, how many people are allowed to come in the stadium, but then how many people are going to just make the decision to stay at home. And then, the best thing that happened for South Carolina would be for the Gamecocks to win 8 games, go to a bowl game, and then that part doesn't even factor into the equation. But you know, who knows? I don't think anybody can make a solid answer right now of what it takes. I believe personally there's a much greater chance that, you know, Muschamp is for another year after this year than maybe there would have been before this, just because of the, like you said, the financials of the matter. But if we don't even know what the finances are going to look like, it's going to be very hard to answer that, Chris.
Yeah, that's you know, the two-pronged approach that you mentioned, the two different things that really play into it is the finances and then the on-field product. I mean, and even then, you know, you might have sort of that, I guess, like a sliding scale. Like, you know, let's say that things went really south and they won 2 games this year. You know, I mean, you weigh that at some point of, okay, what financially is a university in position to do or not do? Because then if you have, say, a 2-win season, then you've got to look ahead at financial implications. Okay, if things are completely normal next year, what do our season tickets look like? I mean, there's so many considerations that go into that. But then you've got just that aspect. You've got the on-field aspect of winning, but you've also got the aspect of, okay, you know, what do the finances look like? And we just don't know that right now. Like Ray Tanner said recently, they've run a bunch of models as far as you know, anywhere from no games, which obviously that's not happening at this point unless something crazy happens, to completely full stadiums and everything in between. And so we really need to have the answer to that, to know what the revenue is going to be, to know what kind of position they're going to be in. Even right now, there's cutbacks, even as things are, just because of what's already happened. And so, you know, they'll have to know that before we can fully answer that question. But I think the even bigger aspect of it, the one that we have to see first, is just what does the on-field product look like? And like you said, it may be that they win 8 games. And if that's the case, then I think things are going to proceed as usual.
Yep. All right. So let's do our giveaway. And I think there's a slight delay because we're on Zoom. There's a slight delay between you guys are going to see this and when we're talking. So we're going to try to hang on to the stream for a second. But I think I got everybody, Chris. I believe there were 9 people that commented. Tony, Brock, Stash, Craig, Rutledge, Kyle, Dexter, David, and TS. So I've put a number by every single one of these guys. Chris, give me a number 1 through 9. The first number that pops into your head is what?
7.
7. All right. Stash, you are our winner. Let's see. It was Stash 17 who asked one of our last questions there. You have won a Gamecocks, a free 6-month subscription to Gamecock Central. And let's see, if you basically, all right, Jordan says I didn't count him. I'm not seeing a comment from you earlier, Jordan. Let's see. Sometimes there are chat. Sort of, I don't know, little things in place that keep them from coming through. But I tell you what, if Stash 17, you win the 6 free months. So here's what I need you to do. Email me, Wes at GamecockCentral.com. Or if you can post your email address if you want me to email you, but if I were you, I wouldn't post my email address on here. So just email me, Wes at GamecockCentral.com. Anybody else, Jordan, or anybody else on here who is not, oh, we did miss Jordan's question, dude.
Oh.
He says, who do we see being the starting center? So I tell you what, in the because we are giving people, anybody who is not already a subscriber that is on here that just is sort of familiar with us because of YouTube and watching the videos, send me an email as well, Wes at Gamecock Central, and I'll try to get you hooked up with something. stash 1 to 6 months. It won't be 6 months, so I'm not going to overpromise. But if you shoot me a message just since you guys listen and just since you tuned in, we'll try to get you hooked up with something. But and I don't think, hopefully Zoom doesn't have an hour limit. So real quick, Chris, who do you think is going to be the starting center?
Man, okay, so just because I've said this before, I think exiting spring, Eric Douglas was actually on top. So I will go with that for now. But obviously, you know, Hank Manos and Vincent Murphy are going to be in the mix for that. Trey Jones has been doing well as a true freshman too. I just don't think they go with a true freshman there. I think it's going to be either Douglas, Murphy, or Manos. And I've just been told that Douglas is really hanging in there and doing quite well. And so the summer and the preseason is going to tell a lot. But just because I think that's where it was exiting the spring, that's what I'll go with right now. But the margin is very tight there for sure.
What about Javon Gwynn potentially?
If he's a guy that moves there, then he's going to have a shot. But, I was just sort of including the guys that, seem to have gotten the most work there. But obviously Gwynn's been thrown around in there. So if he's there, that's going to really that's going to make it tough. That's honestly the toughest. That's probably the toughest position on the team, right, to peg right now as far as who will be the guy there. I think probably the closest race.
Yeah. I maybe one of the receiver spots.
Yeah, maybe so.
But yeah, center, an interesting one. Let's see. We did have another question. Brian Soulsby tuning in. Who do we see as a starting D-line? And by the way, I want to say this before we get to the end. Appreciate you guys joining in and interacting. I love being able to do these. And as long as people keep tuning in, I know people are at work, or maybe you can hang in with us on our break or on your break at work. And if these are popular, which they have been so far, we're going to keep doing them, and maybe even want to do something where, especially during the season, we lock in a particular time, and then you just know that that's when we're going to do the show. And then we'll have guests. We had Preston Thorne on last week. He was outstanding. We'll have guests on. We'll have guests from, that cover the teams that South Carolina is about to play. And we really just want to make this, the YouTube page, sort of an extension, but also something that supplements what we do on Gamecock Central as well. So appreciate you guys sort of supporting our little new endeavor here on YouTube. But Brian wants to know, who would the starting defensive line be for South Carolina this year? I think I'm going to give you the guys that I think are in the running, and then if you want me to sort of just, I guess, pick somebody, like make a decision, I'll do that as well. I would say for defensive tackle, Chris, you basically have three guys being, and sort of the wild card of this is the fact that Keir Thomas is back. But, I think you look, Rick Sandage, Zach Pickens, Keir Thomas are three guys fighting for two spots. That's my feel on defensive tackle. Defensive end, traditional defensive end spot, to me, it's Aaron Sterling, JJ Enagbare, and who starts really doesn't matter because they'll probably split time about equally, but both those guys are going to play a ton. Buck position, I think, is Brad Johnson to start the year. I personally think is Jordan Birch by the end of the year. So if you really sort of made me pick a starting group, I would say, like I said, start of the year, Brad Johnson, but by game 5 or 6, Jordan Birch. Defensive end, because Aaron Sterling started most of the time when healthy last year, I'd say Aaron Sterling again. Defensive tackle, Chris, is where I really struggle because I think all three guys are going to play. Does Keir Thomas, as a senior, step back into his spot as a starting player, or is the combination of Rick Sandage and Zach Pickens, are those guys too talented not to play or not to start? We know they're going to play.
Yeah. I mean, the Thomas question is one as far as, where do you slot him? And I tend to think, maybe more inside. Um, yeah, so I agree with you. At least to start the season, I'd go Johnson. I would Sterling and Barre are going to be interchangeable, but I'd say Sterling just because he's going to be a senior. Um, and I'm actually going to go with Thomas and Sandage right now, with Pickens playing a lot, and could even eventually supplant somebody as a starter. But that's just sort of the gut feel right now. Sandage is, an extra year in the program over Pickens, more of an inside player to start with, whereas Pickens transitioned last year to tackle and still played some and did some nice things, but just a little bit more of an experience edge. And so obviously, and Tierra Thomas got a ton of experience in there too.
Who do you think's the fourth guy, defensive tackle? Jabari Ellis?
Yeah, I would think Jabari Ellis is going to be that fourth guy right now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Brian. To your point, there's talent, but I think there's depth too, man. I mean, you start to look. Jabari Ellis is not going to be like an All SEC guy, I don't think, but he played a good bit late last year against Clemson. Really came on a little bit stronger as far as what the staff thinks of him. You look at defensive end spot, Joe Anderson, a former 4-star guy who's sort of your third string defensive end, I think. Throw in the fact Keir Thomas can play inside or outside. Then I don't know, Rod Fenton at Buck, I guess, is probably your third guy there. But Chris, the fact that Gilbert Edmond is starting at Buck instead of linebacker and is 6'5", 221 pounds, self-reported, but that he had just had his physical when he told me that number. I think Gilbert Edmond, he was a guy that I was like, man, that's a lot of projection to project a guy to play linebacker that's never really played it. Mm-hmm. But Buck is a lot more in line with what we saw if you turn on the film, what he did as a senior. This dude was a wide receiver before last year, had like 17 sacks, 80-something tackles, is a terror off the edge. He may sort of, as far as the defensive line goes, he may be my sleeper. Obviously, we're maybe talking a little bit more down the road, but I actually like that take way more now than I maybe was a little more uncertain of it early on.
Yeah, I think it was definitely projection to say, hey, we want to, and the staff wanted to get a look at him inside. Hey, can we project this guy to a mic, or will they liked his length and the way he moved? But I think it makes a lot of sense to, hey, take a look at what a guy can do and then, let him go do it. And rushing the passer is something that he did pretty well at the high school level. And so I think that made a lot of sense. And so I'm intrigued to see him. I'm not sure what the year one impact will be, but long term, I think there's a lot to like just about his athleticism. And so I'll be very curious to see what the returns are, in the early going for him.
Yeah, and all right, we got to get out of here, but I don't want to leave these folks hanging. We got two more quick questions, Chris. You want to just split them real quick? First one, Frederick Cooper. How do you see defensive back playing out, Chris?
Well, I think there's still a big question, and we sort of were maybe going to get it answered this spring, and then things shut down. But the biggest question to me is, do Cam Smith and John Dixon, one or both, do you feel good enough about playing one of them at a corner spot? They were progressing well. The staff was happy with how they were progressing, towards the end of last year. And obviously Dixon, they both saw the field a little bit. Dixon avoided a red shirt. Smith redshirted because he played in less than 4 games. But that's the big question. Obviously, J.C. Horn's going to play one corner. If you can play Dixon or Smith at a corner spot, that's going to give you a lot more flexibility. Now you can play Israel Mukwamu at safety alongside, R.J. Roderick or Jalen Dickerson. You can play Jamie Robinson at nickel. If you're in regular, you can play Jamie Robinson at safety because he's going to, showed some flashes and can do some really good things. So I think, if you had to call it, because I will go here with what's ideal for the staff. I'm going to say Dixon and Horn at corner, Mukwamu and either RJ or Dickerson at safety. It just if Dickerson could stay healthy, I wouldn't be surprised if he got it. And then Jamie Robinson at nickel. And if they're not nickel, I think you could see Robinson and Mukwamu being the guys. But it'll be really interesting to see how that all shakes out. I think there's a few swing type moves there based on how guys progress.
Definitely. And one last question from Stash 17. Will Bobo rotate quarterbacks or does he stick with one guy? I think most quarterback coaches, man, would rather have the one guy if he's performing well. And I think if Ryan Helinski is the guy, which I tend to think he's still the incumbent starter, that he'll get the first crack at it. If he plays well, South Carolina's moving the ball on offense, then I think that's always your preference. That's one spot, unless you're Steve Spurrier, that you really just want to keep the same guy in there and let the offense sort of grow around him. Will there maybe be some change of pace stuff? Maybe getting a Darion Joyner in there for some different type elements to bring to the offense, or maybe even a Luke Doty for some different elements potentially. But I would say just on a down-to-down basis, you'll want to have the same guy in there, and I would imagine that that's sort of what Bobo will look to do. All right, guys, we've gone about an hour and 11 minutes now, so we're going to get out of here, but appreciate all of you joining. Like I said, hit the subscribe button here on YouTube so we can keep getting these numbers up. And if you like the content on here, please feel free. Come check our content out on GamecockCentral.com. And like I said, Stash, make sure you've emailed me. Anybody else, shoot me an email as well, Wes@GamecockCentral.com. If you're listening, we'll try to hook you up with something and get you on Gamecock Central as well. So for Chris, I'm Wes. We'll talk to you later.